This presentation, titled Best Auditing Practices Throughout the Value Chain, Farm, Processor, Retailer, comes to us from Thea Laufs. Thea's mission throughout the last 28 years has been to improve the food safety culture and assist with the food safety and quality standards trend setting in South Africa. Her experience and expertise include more than 25 years of auditing across all the industries, including, but not limited to, food and packaging manufacturing, QSR, restaurants, hotels, abattoirs, and farms. In addition, she is an internationally certified lead auditor in food safety and quality. Thea participates on various industry committees, SANS, SATA, RMMA, FSSC, etc., and is always keen to share her technical expertise and guidance to industry. In 2009, Thea acquired the Agency for Africa for a CPG Global and has grown her client base through her dedication, commitment, and passion for the industry. Her vast experience and knowledge base was the reason she was appointed Technical Director for Food Safety for CPG internationally back in 2015. And with that, take it away, Thea.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity again to speak at the conference. And as an auditor, I hope I'll be giving some value information to the listeners. Okay, let me just get my slides. So we're going to talk about best auditing practices throughout the value chain. And as I mentioned, I am from CPG, Certification Partner Global, and I've been an auditor for quite some time. And I'll be trying to share some information with you in terms of the whole value chain, starting from the farm side all the way through to your restaurant and retail sector. Just some background on CPG to start off with. Our head office is in Australia, and we're currently in 22 countries. And I'm from South Africa, and we certify various ISO standards all the way through from 9001 all the way to your food safety standards. And I'm going to talk about food safety specifically because that is my expertise today. Right, but first let's start with what is a standard auditing protocol. There's a protocol that you have to follow as an auditor. So let's look at what is an audit. It's a snapshot of the site and the particular area that you're going to audit at that day and time. So again, when you go a week later, things might look totally different. But at that snapshot, at that day, that is what you've seen as an auditor. And that is what you normally will put in your report. So if you look at why we do these audits, first of all, depending on what type of audit you are doing, if you are doing an internal or external third-party audit, for various legislations, as you see, I've mentioned a few, you get your various meat safety acts, your health and safety, foodstuffs, cosmetics, and in each country, you will have to make sure that you know what is the actual legal requirements of that country where you are auditing, because that is going to be your baseline of what you're auditing against. If you're auditing specific to a customer requirements, you also have to make sure that you know that requirements to include it in your audit and your feedback and base your findings thereon. Why are we still doing that? To protect the brand, to look at food safety, maybe for quality reasons. So there's various different types of audits that you will get, and you as an auditor must make sure you know what is your request, what are you going to audit against, and that you can give the proper feedback and add value at the end of the day when you audit. The other reasons for auditing is also to make sure the companies comply to legal requirements so they don't get any criminal charges or fines, and to make sure that your customer or your client is happy with what are you supplying to them. So that is the main reasons why we perform the audit, is to comply to requirements, either legal or from your customer. Now, we all follow a risk-based approach, and we base it on your ISO standard, where it describes very clearly your PDCA method. And as an auditor, when you walk through the facilities, there's certain things that you ask yourself. I always say it's the what and the how rule. So what are you going to look at? When are they performing that operation? Where specifically? How are they doing it? Against what standard or requirements? Who's the person responsible? And then keep in mind your legal requirements on a risk-based approach. So if I use an example, if you walk through a facility and you've read their policies and their procedures, you will then audit that procedure as to what are they doing on the floor. What will be described in your procedure? What that are they supposed to do? How often is the when? Daily, weekly, monthly? And what is the procedure? That is your how. Who's the responsible person that will do the action? Who will check what they are doing? And based on that, you will decide whether they comply to their own policies, procedures, and whether that complies to your legal requirements. If not, that is when you start writing your findings. And later on, you will then base it on, is it a minor, a major, or critical finding? If for some reason you're using a checklist for auditing, you will then fill in the checklist based on the scoring that you will allocate to that form and based on if they comply or not. So depending on what criteria you're using, you will still follow the PDCA method, and you as an auditor will make the decision based on risk. Is it critical or is it not? Will it make somebody ill in a food factory, or will it make them sick, or is it just a little finding paper related? For example, a checklist wasn't dated or signed. Is that really critical, or can you make it a minor? So as an auditor, those are the type of things that you must remember. And you can see how critical it is for you to know your requirements and your legal requirements that you are going to audit against. Because if you have to make the decision whether it's comply or not in a few seconds standing on the floor, you need to make sure you know your facts. Right. So if I look at the value chain, now auditing can be all the way from the farm right through to your retailer or your restaurants or your wholesalers. And I'm going to use an example today to take you through the various sections of auditing and to give you some idea how different the audits on the farm will be versus, for example, in a food factory or in a restaurant. So I will take you through a few examples, and I decided to take beef as an example. And so we will take it from the cattle on the farm all the way through to you buying as a consumer a piece of steak at either restaurant or retailer store. Before we get to that, what is your auditor qualifications? And we're going to look at it now, and I'm going to summarize it for you later on again. If I look at auditor qualifications, you need to have some work experience in the field that you would audit. You also need some qualifications, either a degree or BSc degree or diploma or some sort of qualification that you can actually say you know the process and you are qualified to audit that procedures. If I look at industry specific, for example, a veterinarian will be perfect for auditing farms because that is really related to the knowledge and industry knowledge, versus to a restaurant or food manufacturing plant that you actually need food safety and maybe your production qualifications, which might be slightly different to, for example, veterinarian on the farm that will look at medicines, animal health, etc. So you as an auditor must make sure that based on your qualifications and your experience, that you can actually audit the facility that the auditing body is required from you. Okay. So if I start with the example in the meat industry, we'll look at beef. We're going to start at the feedlot or the farm. We're going to take us through the abattoir or the slaughterhouse in some areas. We're going to look at deboning and processing that meat further, either into a patty or boerewors, and then how it's sold to retail and wholesale and restaurants, and what is your requirements in terms of being an auditor in these different sectors. Okay. So let's look at the farm or the feedlot. Now, farms, and I can speak from a South African experience now, and I think Australia as well. We have farms where they will have the cattle, and then after that, it will go for a month or two to a feedlot environment where they get fed more, and before they are then sent off to the slaughterhouse or the abattoir. Now, what are we looking at when we're on a farm or at a feedlot? First of all, your animals have to be identified either with an ear tag or some tattoo or mark or brand mark. That is identification to say this animal comes from that owner, and there's always a record of that animal in terms of what medications they had in their life, is there any illnesses or diseases, etc. And that plays a very big role further down the line in terms of the quality of your meat and the food safety of that product. Environmental impact, that plays a big role in terms of water and waste, and that needs to be audited as well. That will be part of your requirements. If we look at medications, growth promotants, hormones, And I think these days people don't want all these things in their meat anymore. So that is always one of the questions. Was there any growth hormones? Was there any antibiotics added? If that is added because the animal was sick, there is normally a withdrawal time frame. That is part of what you will audit as an auditor. So here you can see with the type of things that we're looking at, you need that experience and knowledge based on what you're going to audit. So do you know the type of medication that is given to animals? What is the withdrawal periods, etc. If you look at humane handling of cattle, very important. There's certain things that you cannot do when you offload them or when it goes through to be loaded again for the abattoir. Those are quite a lot of requirements that you need to know how to handle them humanely, because at the end of the day, as I said, it plays a role in the quality of your meat, as well as we don't want to abuse the poor animals. Feed quality that is sent to the animals to be fed. So what is the quality of the feed? What is in the feed? There's certain regulations that you need to know. What can you feed them? How often can you feed them to gain weight, but not to overfeed them as well? Water quality. Is the water safe for the animals to drink? Is there a lot of heavy metals in the water? Or what is the quality of that water that we are feeding them? If we look at weighing of animals, there's a certain farm process that the guys will weigh them at a certain time to make sure there is some weight gained so that you can sell them at a certain weight. And also in terms of checking those animals daily for illnesses or diseases, or maybe one of them is not eating, so something is wrong with the animal. You need to call your veterinarian in. So those are the type of questions that you as an auditor will ask. Another point, which is quite important, is your management system of that farm or feedlot. And that is basically linked to your ISO requirements. Who's the responsible person? Is there a farm plan? Is there checklists and policies, procedures? That the staff have any training on how to handle the animals? So all those type of questions is part of your audit on a farm or on a feedlot. Now you guys can see that you can't just be a food safety person auditing a farm if you don't have all this knowledge. Okay. If you move from the farm or the feedlot to the actual abattoir or the slaughterhouse, different requirements plays a role, different regulations plays a role. So you now start again. First of all, animal handling, when they get offloaded. Can you slaughter the animals straight away, or do they have to stand in the pen for a day? Do you feed them? All those questions plays a role, and that's part of your questionnaire that you will look at. If we get to what we call ante-mortem, that is your inspection of the animals when they arrive. Here you need to be either meat inspector or veterinarian, because you must look at the animal and see if there's any illnesses or sickness or things that you can pick up from looking at the animal, looking at the paperwork to see if it's fit for slaughtering, or do you have to make arrangements, for example, for emergency slaughter. From there, we will go through to the slaughter process, and the slaughter process also have rules, and here your food safety starts playing a big role. People will start have to wash their hands, protective clothing has to be worn, training for the staff plays a role. That is all the things that you now link back to in terms of your food safety requirements. So there's an abattoir process that you look at, but there's also the food safety side that you will look at. Legal requirements in every country, again, plays a role, and you need to make sure as auditor that you know them. Then the very big thing is traceability. You as an auditor will have to make sure that you will be able to trace the product from receiving the live animal all the way through to the slaughter side until it goes further down the process line in terms of deboning and cutting of the meat pieces. So again, your knowledge will have to be on traceability and knowing how to trace that product back, looking at paperwork as well as the process that you have followed in terms of slaughtering. Management system plays a role here as well. So we refer here to your HACCP or your ISO 22000 or your FSSC requirements that plays a role here. So you as an auditor will have to make sure then that you understand what is the requirement in terms of that areas. And if you walk through a slaughterhouse or abattoir, for the people that's been through one, you will realize it's sometimes there's a lot of water because they're spraying the meat, the animals, or the ones it's slaughtered. There's water on the floor, obviously there's blood. So by auditing, you might not be able to make a lot of notes on a piece of paper. So what do you then do as an auditor to remember all these things that you see? And I'll touch on that a little bit later on to give you some tips on what to do. If we go through to deboning and processing, now sometimes it's all part of one facility, sometimes it's a different facility that you need to go to. Requirements in terms of showering in and changing your protective clothing plays a role. So you, again, as an auditor, must make sure you know what's the requirements of the company, as well as then starting your auditing process. Right, we will look at very similar to your abattoir or slaughterhouse facility. Traceability plays a big role. Food safety plays a big role. And here you would start looking at hand labor, if they're deboning by hand, or equipment. So you need to know what is the equipment requirements, what is cleaning, pest control, or your PRPs play a role. You will look at things like internal auditing that the company will do, which is also part of your requirements for ISO 22000 and FSSC. Here you will also look at laboratory analysis. So are they sending the meat pieces for analysis at an external or internal laboratory? You will look at hand swabs or surface swabs to make sure the place are clean and tidy when they are processing. You will look at hazard monitoring. Now here, the auditor will make sure that they understand the process to be able to identify your different hazards. Now from previous, you all know your different hazards would be chemical, physical, microbial. So you as an auditor, because you understand the process, you will quickly pick up if there's any risk or anything that is wrong in the process based on your knowledge and your experience. Now, if we just touch on one of them, for example, what can go wrong when you debone or process a product? First of all, cross-contamination with knives that's not sterilized or not clean, people touching the product if they didn't wash their hands. So those are the type of things that you will look up and see if you see anything wrong as you walk through the facility. Taking in mind that there's a lot of people on the floor, and you as an auditor, again, must make sure you're not in their way, but you can still view and see if there's anything wrong that you need to identify and write down. All right, so again, we follow the PDCA method in this facility as well. We base our auditing on risk. Is it a high risk? Is it a low risk? If there's anything wrong, will you classify your possible findings as minor, major, or critical? Or do you have a checklist that you fill in terms of scoring? So you will see based on the first step that we've done on the farm, and then we went to the abattoir and the deboning side, very similar rules, but there's different ways of looking at things, and there's different points that you need to look at from the live animal to now the slaughtered carcass or the piece of meat. So your view will then change in terms of what you're looking at. Okay. From here, normally the product is sold either to wholesale or retail or a restaurant. And different things you will look at here as well, depending on what the facility are doing. Are they getting a pre-packed product in? Then all you have to look at is, for example, temperature control, receiving, traceability, and your legal requirements of how they handle that pack of product, piece of steak or a pack of boerewors, a pack of mince, whatever you will then look at. However, some of your areas and your wholesale facilities will buy half a carcass or a whole carcass, and they will actually cut that product as they are going to use it further down the line. So here you will then bring in other factors that we've discussed in your deboning and cutting plants you will look at on this side as well. A lot of restaurants in South Africa, and I'm sure it's happening all over the world, will have pieces of meat that they will then start cutting into smaller pieces of steak that you can choose from. Here you will then also look at similar requirements. For example, knife sterilization, cleaning of the facility, cutting boards that they use, that it must be in a good quality. So all those things you will then, as an auditor, have to make sure it's on your checklist or part of the things that you are looking at. All right. If we look at the different points, we've got receiving and temperature control, and I think temperature plays a very big role in any of these facilities because of the product that I'm using as an example. Traceability, again, if you have a consumer or customer that might be ill and they come back to your facility, you need to be able to trace that product back all the way to the farm to see where was the problem and what could have been the scenario. For example, if there was antibiotics in or something and the person might be have an allergic reaction to it, that is how you will trace back to see what you've missed. If there was a possible food poisoning complaint, you will have to go investigate where did the contamination happen. Was it in restaurant or retail, or did it happen at your packing plant, deboning plant, abattoir? Where did it actually originate? So that is the type of things that you will look at when you audit as well. Again, your labeling requirements, and most countries have labeling regulations that you need to know, and your legal requirements. So again, as I said earlier, you as an auditor must know all your facts and all your regulations before you can actually start auditing these facilities. Food safety, as I said, play a big role in these areas as well, and storage and handling, which goes hand in hand with your temperature controls and your packing of the products. And similar PRPs plays a role even in restaurants. So your cleaning, your pest control, your correct clothing, hand washing, all those are still very important. So what will you as an auditor do? You will stand in those areas and look if they are compliant to the procedures that they said they're going to follow. Are they washing their hands correctly? So you as an auditor will go stand in hand basin when somebody's washing their hands to see what protocols are they following. And that is the type of things that you will look at in terms of looking at the procedure, what are they doing on the floor, and seeing if it's compliant or not. Okay. All right. Now, if I look at auditor requirements, I said I will touch on it later. Now, we've looked at various areas in the supply chain from farm to restaurant now, and we looked at what you as an auditor will look at. But here we will look at the different knowledge and experience that you as an auditor require before you can actually audit some of these things. We touched on some on the feedlot and the farms. I think veterinarians plays a big role, or a farm course that you've done. So if you as an auditor is going to do a course or a degree, you must know all that requirements in terms of animals and what you have to look at in terms of medicines, etc. So here I've listed a few. Your experience and qualifications, either veterinarian or similar qualifications, experience. Either you must have worked on a farm or on a feedlot, or at least have done 5 or 10 audits, depending on what your certification body requires, with a qualified auditor in this field that can sign you off as a qualified auditor. What sometimes also can happen is if you do not have the experience or the knowledge, you can take a technical expert with you that is either veterinarian or farm expert, and then you can use that as an assistant to you as an auditor. So keep that in mind if you go out to audit farms or feedlots. Abattoirs, we said the same. You can have either production or a slaughter degree or a food safety degree with experience in an abattoir or slaughterhouse. Meat inspection plays a big role because there is people doing inspection on the meat to say whether there's any diseases or illnesses. Can this meat be sent out for human consumption or not? Does it have to be discarded? So you as an auditor must have some knowledge of meat inspection as well. Or again, as I said, take a technical expert with you that can assist you in those areas. You will have to know the slaughter process, and because we used beef or cattle as an example, if you qualified in that sector, it doesn't mean that you can now go and audit ostriches, for example, or goats or game meat, for example, because you need to make sure that you understand that type of animal and their diseases or illnesses that they might have as well. So keep that in mind. Also, if you are working in abattoir-related auditing, make sure if they send you to a bakery that you know the requirements of bakery, because now it's a totally different food safe or food product that you are going to look at. So that is basically the concept that I want to get across. If you look at deboning, wholesale, retail, and restaurants, a food safety degree or production degree normally plays a role, and courses that you would have to do, for example, ISO or microbiology course, so that you as an auditor are qualified to look at the various sectors and requirements when you are following a chain like this. Most of the CBs or auditing bodies will have different people for these sectors. but sometimes you do get people that can actually audit the whole chain, which is also sometimes nice because you can do the traceability all the way through and from the restaurant all the way back. But you have to make sure you have all that knowledge and experience. Okay. Now, I spoke about auditing tools earlier on, and I mentioned that if you're in an environment where there's a lot of water or blood, or can you actually take a piece of paper or clipboard with you? It will be very difficult. Can you take a tablet or a phone with you that might get wet and you will lose all your information? So here, you as an auditor must make sure that when you go into a production facility, you can make use of the tools that is for your comfort. You will be able to make notes, but it will still comply in terms of the area where you are in. If you cannot make notes in that area, you have to try and remember it. But I always advise to try and take some sort of equipment with you, either a clipboard or your phone that you can put in your pocket in wet areas, but at least that you have the evidence. So when you start writing your report or your findings, that you can have enough evidence to base your finding on. So just make sure what you are using in what area. Restaurants, wholesale, that's easy because it's dry environments. It's easy to make notes on a piece of paper. The second thing that you as an auditor must make sure of in this example that we are talking about, you might have to take temperatures. So do you have a thermometer with you as an auditor? So you must make sure before you audit that you have all your tools that you need, either thermometer or lax reading for the light to see if there's enough light to do your quality control on. So you have to make sure what are you taking with, what can you take into the facility, and do you have all the equipment that you need as an auditor to be able to give a proper report back. And as I said earlier, to add value, because that's also what we do as auditors. You have to add value at the end of the day. Otherwise, it just becomes a police exercise where you write the findings and you go ahead. Right. So the next one that I want to touch on is dress code. And we find it quite often where auditors are not always sure what to dress in certain environments. Now, you as an auditor must make sure when you go to a farm, when you go to an abattoir, when you go to a restaurant, that your dress code is appropriate for that industry that you're auditing, and also for the company that you are auditing for. They might have certain rules that you need to follow. So for the ladies out there, make sure you don't go with a dress if you're going to be in an environment where that is not appropriate, or if you have to wear certain shoes. So those are the type of things that you must make sure that you know up front, so you get to the facility dressed accordingly. Some of the facilities will provide you with protective clothing, like either gumboots or safety shoes, a coat and whatever you need, and a hard hat, for example. Then that is easy because you will be dressed according to the company's requirements. But in terms of dress code, just you as an auditor make sure what is required, that you follow the rules. Now, one point that I want to make as well, in terms of auditing, we all want to go out and audit, and we want to obviously be able to audit all the industries and all the areas. But if you know as an auditor that you don't have the qualifications or the knowledge, there's no one that you can take with you, you have to say no for that audit. And it's very important because sometimes we do find feedback from clients where they say, but your auditor did not know the process, or they didn't have enough experience to audit me in this facility, which can be actually very bad feedback on you as auditor, but also to the auditing company. So for both company and the auditor, make sure if they send you somewhere that you have the tools, you have the knowledge, you have the experience that you can actually audit. And the big thing is that you know the requirements, the legal requirements, the industry requirements, that you will be able to give proper feedback to the client that you're auditing for. So say no if you can't. I think that is the big message. Right. That is it from me. I hope I could add some value and give you some valuable tips for the auditors out there, and what you have to look for and what you need to take with you. So I hope I've given you some information on this. Thank you.
And thank you, Thea Laufs, for that look at auditing best practices throughout the food supply chain. And that concludes this presentation.